seconds. Yeah,
Oh,
now it's like
cool.
hi guys, welcome to Zero Chills TV. We are just gossiping with Moses Tizomu. Who by the way, he'll tell us what his name means. Tizomu Kasozi. Hey, that's a hard name. I was just there measuring my tongue here and there. Welcome to Zero Chills TV. Today we have the lead strategists, and I've always been interested in what strategy is because most of the time, these young people who have their own multifaceted agency, they just start an agency without a strategy. So at least today we are going to get free information for free. So make sure you ask your questions and let's have fun. So Tizomu, welcome, and please tell us what your name means.
Oh my god, I wish I knew what my name actually means. But I don't. But yeah, my name is Moses Tizomu. Currently the lead strategist for Scanad Africa. I don't know which name it goes by, but Scanad, one of the leading creative agencies in the country and the region. Yeah.
Okay. I was just confirming I have my notes all over in the same place. But when you talk strategy, what do you talk about? Because I was reading some article by, can't remember the author, but they were talking about the difference between planners and people who set plans, and it was all over the place. And most of the time when you talk strategy, we just know, or rather what comes to mind when you talk about strategy is the plan behind the plan. But you being a strategist yourself, how do you define strategy?
And you're right. I think that there are so many definitions. There's a lot of, I would call it nomenclature. There are so many, different definitions of strategy. There's very different. There are people who call them strategists, and other people call them planners.
Yes.
There are people who think of strategy as this very huge thing that only a business is doing and not a creative agency should be doing. So there's a lot of there are a lot of misaligned definitions about it, but. And I'll explain to you because there's a whole history behind it, behind why the phrasing is so confusing. But I think my favorite definition of strategy is it's an informed and it's by a guy called Mark Pollard. It's called it's an informed decision to win, right? And what strategy sort of forms at any level of a business or at any level of an organization is a framework for making decisions, right? And if you pick a brief, if you get a brief from the client, at that point you have so many decisions you could do. You could go digital, for instance, right? You could talk about culture, you could talk about anything, right? And so it's the job of the strategist to sort of distill all of that. Of course, informed by a lot of research, but informed by what you know about the market, what you know about the consumers, what you know about the business, and therefore make a series of almost mold of very little decisions that almost inform everything else that you do after that. So I think that's how I define strategy in a way, in a short way.
That's a good way, and maybe just to like you said, it's almost an informed decision to win. And most of the time when creatives come up with, because how I saw it how it was working in Scanad is that you are the first point of communication, in the agency, where the client comes with a brief, but then and I used to like it, so how the strategy used to come together, and then I could see because me, I was just interested in the ad, can we get down to work? Can we do the work?
Can we get down to the coffee?
There was work behind the work, and then you'd come with the strategy and then the propositioning, could you run us through how it works, from the moment you receive a brief before now the creative gets the go ahead from the strategy team?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, I think, and so before I even get to, I guess, how, what the process looks like, right? I think, let me run you through a bit about the history of, strategy in advertising.
Yes.
I think it's definitely one of the youngest disciplines in advertising. And I think if you think about it, for people who are not necessarily exposed to the industry, there's three key disciplines in an agency, right? In a creative agency, that is, right? There is account management, there is the creatives, and then there is the strategists, right? So before the 80s, right? There only used to be two, and that's just the account management and the creative team, right? And problem that that sort of had was the problem is when the brief came into the agency, it used to get into the client service, right, or the account people, right, and then they would easily just pass the brief on to the creatives, right, and therefore the challenge that sort of brings about is the fact that creatives sort of expect to have some sort of direction, right? But the problem is for the account management team, they don't have the time to actually, think about how to, what is happening in the business, to think about what's happening with the consumers, to think about what's happening in the market, right? Because they have other accounts to manage, right? They're talking to the client constantly. They're trying to run projects within the agency, all of that, right? So the need for someone who's dedicated to think about all those things by the time the brief is getting to creatives started to arise, right? And one of the first initial names of a strategist was an account planner, because it was almost an evolution of an account person, right, or an account manager, right? And so this was the person who was dedicated to doing research or analyzing research and thinking about what the business environment for this particular brief comes from, or thinking about what's the culture for the consumers, what are the rituals, it's a beer brand, what are the current rituals that a strategist or rather a consumer is consuming your product through. So in that way, then the role of the strategist came about, right? And then of course, and that's why you'll always hear some people call them planners, some people call them strategists. I think they're the same person because they do the same job. So anyway, that's a brief history of how the strategy discipline or the strategy craft came about. And so the job of a strategist in an agency is almost two roles, right? The first one is an internal role, right? So when you get a brief from the client, there's usually a lot of stuff. And Eddie, you've definitely seen you've seen how our briefs sort of come from the client. There's a lot of things, right? Because the client is looking at it from a business point of view, right? And so the job of a strategist is to take that brief and be able to distill it in a sense that by the time you're giving this to a creative, they can easily understand what we're trying to do with this particular project, what's the narrative we need to tell, who is the consumer that we're actually targeting, right? So usually I'll give it to you in the form of a proposition, right? And from that alone, you immediately in one single line you start to think about, this can take me to this direction, right? Or this can take me to this other direction. So that's the internal role. There's an interesting role that a strategy plays from an external role, and that's almost selling the work to the client, right? And so again, if I roll you back into the history again, usually before the digital age and how the new age creative agencies that we see today, before it used to be the job of the account people to sort of present the work to the client, right? And the creatives would just stay in the office and always bang out the briefs every single minute, right? And so there started to be a particular importance for us to sell work, and not just in how creative it is, but in how it's able to actually achieve the business goals, right?
Yeah.
And in that way, then that's very specific role for to be able to justify the idea. I think what people forget is sometimes advertising sort of operates in service of a business, right? It's not just about your ad looks really good, or the visuals are really nice, or the copy is really funny. At the end of the day, that ad has to sell work, right? And so the job of a strategist to the client is to actually be able, rather the value, to the client is to be able to justify, why we're talking this way, and from that alone, you could easily tell that, we picked out a very specific audience, and this is how the audience behaves, and this is their culture, and this is why we're selling, this ad looks in this particular way. And you see, from that alone, the client is able to understand why the creatives looks the way it looks, right? And so those are almost the two interesting roles that a strategist plays in an agency, and to clients as
well. Great. There are things that you said which, as I was preparing for the show, you had also written about, especially about humor. But before we get to humor, I've realized that you've talked all this information and impacted all this information out here, but just like in advertising, when you want to go to an advertising school in the country, but there's no advertising school in Kenya, at least, and even in the university, what they offer vis-a-vis what the market requires are totally two different things. And while I was talking, or rather researching you went to Strathmore, but you did BCom. And my question therefore is one taught strategy, it's someone just has a knack for it? Just like, when we had Ametilia, he told us, some people say they're creative, but you at least have to have the talent, either as an art director or as a copywriter, to at least get into the industry, and then that can be sharpened. For strategy, how does it work? Do you go to school for strategy? Because, if someone wants to become a strategy, what is the first step that they take?
First of all, there's definitely no school that will teach you strategy, for sure.
Sad.
Yeah, and it's really sad. I think that's part of the problem. I mean, if you think about South Africa, for instance, they actually have specific schools for advertising. Think about, I think there's one called Vega School of Advertising, and there's actual courses where you could, take up, strategic marketing, you could take up comms planning, you could take up, copywriting as its own, right, as its own sort of discipline. So I think that's part of the problem. I think there are some organizations trying to sort of step in, to fill that pipeline gap. I mean, you think about it's called International School of Advertising, ISA. I think they do a really job in just being able to upskill, young people on these very, very interesting careers that you'll never really hear about. But I think how I got into strategy was a ridiculous journey, because I remember back in school, back in Strath, there was this guy who used to run Squad Africa. It's called Gaurav Singh, I think. And he used to run the digital part of WPP. And he came to school because I was doing a random course about digital marketing. And he came and he gave us a very interesting talk about advertising, and this is the kind of work we're doing, and these are the clients we have. And we were all it was a class of marketing students, and we all got so interested about it, right? I particularly I'd never heard about advertising. I'd learned about marketing, but I didn't know there was an industry called advertising. And then from then on, I sort of looked around and I saw a couple of agencies. I shot my proposal, or rather my CV, and I'm like, I'm trying to get into this industry, whatever, right? So, even I think my first job in an agency wasn't actually a strategy job. I got in as a business development person, right? And I think my job was to essentially, go look for clients, go look for pitches, which, if I think about it, was a very ridiculous way of doing it. And I learned that really fast, right? And so I think my first agency was Y&R, Creative Y&R. And from then on, I remember I went to my boss and I told her, I can't sell, I can't sell anything to people because I don't understand what we're selling, right? This is someone who's just a month in advertising. I don't really understand what we're selling. And I remember there was a particular lady who was called Olivia Kimani. Definitely my first strategy boss, and I said, I really want to work with Olivia, because if I'm able to understand the strategy side of it, then I'm able to sell our products or sell our agency to clients really well, right? And so that's how it actually started. So I sort of, created this sort of hybrid role where I was, a business development person, but also dabbling as a strategist person, right? And in that way, I was, I started learning about it. It was really interesting. In that way, I think strategy is definitely one of the most interesting things, because you almost have this very aerial view of the whole agency, right? Because you're able to understand, you're almost sitting at the midpoint of, how the creative works and also how the business works, right? And you're almost translating, these two sides of it. Anyway, so that's how I got into strategy, and over time I was just able to learn, there is no school or there's no one place where you can learn stuff about strategy, but there's so many people who are putting out a lot of work, because it's actually a universal problem, right? All strategists in the world are actually facing the problem of, there's no one place you can actually go and learn stuff, right? And so people are very liberal, or people are very open to sharing what they know about, strategy, about work, about, and so in that way, you're almost able to crowdsource this, huge or plethora of information, and you're able to sort of, create your craft. So that's how I was able to, sort of learn what we're doing, what I'm doing currently. There's a lot of past case studies that you can almost have access to. There's a very strong strategy community online, on Twitter, on Facebook. And I can definitely, link some below for people who are interested. Just go get in there, get in those groups, and then you'll start to see, you start to interact with, strategists from all over the world, and you almost, you start to get better at what you're doing. So that's how I got in. It's a long story. There was no formula into it. It's not what I thought I was going to do. But you know what? Turned out really well, I think.
yeah, it did. You're doing a good job, and this is me saying from outside in.
Thank you, dude.
Let's talk about something that really fascinated me: the concept of rolling in the mud, the one that you are talking about on your LinkedIn. About how warthogs roll in the mud, to keep cool, because they don't have sweat glands. Which this will sound strange, but also in the Luya community, young people, when they get circumcised, they are strewn mud all over their bodies because it keeps them cold, and it also prevents the veins from showing. So when they get circumcised, they heal faster. So I'm not saying it's related to the rolling in the mud thing, but that's what happens. And you talk about, right now we are doing a lot of remote learning and e-commerce, and is it the future? Because everyone keeps talking about when Corona ends, when we get back to work, but probably we are not going to get back to work. So you as a strategist, how do you foresee the new working conditions? Of course, I know in the internet, the rave is all about remote working and working from home, but from your point of view and from your experience, and what do you project going forward?
I think the future is very uncertain, right? And I think because human beings are inherently optimistic, we have this imagination that the future is Corona is going to end in the next 1 year. In fact, when this thing started in March, we all thought by August we should definitely be out of this, right?
Yes.
But the truth is, and if you've seen how this thing is operating around the world, is that it's very different from anything we've ever dealt with before, right? And I think the more pragmatic decision, or the more pragmatic answer, is that this thing is not probably going to end, right? Because it's happening at very different, it's almost there's not one timeline, right?
Yes.
For instance, in Kenya, we thought we were okay in December, but turns out we're not, right? If you think about what's happening in India right now, they're almost getting their very devastating second wave. Yes. So I think that the truth is it's probably not going to go away. And even in terms of working, I think working from home has been immense, right? And e-commerce has been great as well. I think of course there are a lot of negatives when it comes to the pandemic, but there's also there's a lot of positives. And that's where that article about about what hogs rolling in mud was about, right? Is what human beings have always, evolved because of difficult circumstances, right? Innovation comes from a difficult circumstance, right? And so if you think about working from home and then being able to do your Zoom calls, buy your things online, talk to your friends on social, all of that has come because it was a difficult situation, and that's why all those activities have been accelerated, right? In terms of the future, I think one point is definitely, we need to all admit that this thing is definitely not going to go away. And once we make that decision, or once we agree that this thing is not going to go away, then we're able to sort of combine how we're able. I think in future we're going to see a hybrid type of system where you work half from home and then you kind of pop into the office once in a while, or a few times a week, right? Because the downfall or the downside of working from home, while you're able to work, you have the freedom to run your schedule, it's a lot more relaxing. For sure, you're able to put in more hours, what you'd be using, the time that you'd be using in transit is now, sort of going into your work. I think the downside is that collaboration is definitely not the same, right? It's not like, like before, and I sure you know this, because when we were brainstorming for an idea, we'd just go to a room and we'd sit there for like an hour or 2 hours, laugh half of it, and then immediately find something interesting, right? And that's what we're losing out when it comes to working from home, right? Meetings are too efficient now. It's an hour, and if you don't crack an idea in an hour, you move on to the next time. So I think just for the sake of collaboration, and our industry is very collaborative. A lot of our work is just putting our heads together. I think we need to find a sort of hybrid system for that to work.
Amazing. Now, Ovita is asking, first of all, he's talking about he's thrilled to see you here. He won't mention where he saw or heard you, so I don't know. Yeah, he also says you are mad talented. Okay, seems Ovita has some groupie love. He has a question as well.
Thanks, Ovita.
Do you have a process when drafting or crafting strategies, and can you recommend some of the best online course institution where one can learn strategy and add strategies?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the advantages of all the agencies I've worked have been global agencies or have been part of global networks. The advantage of being part of a global network is you have access to a lot of resources, right? And one thing about strategy, sorry?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, and one of the advantage of a lot of global agencies almost always have a strategy philosophy, and this part of that strategy philosophy is a framework, right? And I'll tell you, one of my most favorite frameworks was definitely from Winder, which is called OCTA, right? Objective, Challenge, Truth, Answer. And it's almost, you need to figure out what your objective is, all the way from your business objective to what your communication objective is. You need to identify the business challenge and also translate it to a consumer challenge. And then you find an insight that tries to unlock that particular challenge. And then you have an answer, which is almost, it's what you'd call a strategic proposition that almost shows the problem in a new light, right? And you see now that was Winar's way of doing it. I'll tell you another one called, I don't know what it's called, but it's almost objective. It's a cross like this, right? So objective at the top, what the challenge is, what the advantage is, and what's the strategy, right? So objective, you're able to figure out what you set out what you're trying to do, what's standing in the way of that objective, what advantage does your product or does your brand have, and therefore what's the proposition, or what's the strategy, or how you want to approach this, right? I can definitely share some links with this. I think one of the best planning people who are really trying, who are doing a lot of work in trying to set the foundation from a knowledge perspective around strategy is a guy called Julian Cole. right? If you want to learn anything about strategy, go to Julian Cole, because he breaks it down in a very, very, very simple way, right? I think he worked at BBDO, and he carries a lot of one of my favorite tools again from him is called Get to Buy, right? So what you're trying to do, which is a get to where you're trying to move them towards a new behavior, trying to make consumers do and buy in how you're going to do it, and that's the strategy, right? So Julian Cole is one place to go look at. He runs a platform called Planning Dirty, which has a lot of resources around strategy. There's a guy called Mark Pollard. You should definitely go check him out. He runs a Facebook group, a very, very good Facebook group called Sweathead. So just go sweat head, right? Just go search for that, get into those groups, and then from there on, and then you can start to see, all the different other places, or all the resources and all the conversations that strategists are having there. So that's definitely what I'd advise you to do. I'll definitely send a lot of these things to Mr. Ashia here. I will definitely post them, so you're able to have a look at that. I forgot his second part of the question.
His second part, he was talking about, do you have a process when drafting and crafting these strategies?
Okay, cool. In terms of a process, I think I've given out what my framework usually is, and that framework usually guides my process, right? Because once you're able to outline the objectives, you almost, and I have a few sort of training tools that will almost show you how to sort of break down, one objective into, the 4 key objectives. One is a business objective, what the marketing objective is, and then what the communication objective is, right? And yes. After that, once the process of just outlining that, you're almost able to start to think about all the things you need to see, right? You have to think about the consumers, you have to think about the business environment that you're operating in. I think looking at your competition is very important. I think the need for advertising and the need for marketing arises when you have competition, right? So, even the idea of brand, comes from, orienting yourself to a particular part of the market, right? Which is distinctive and is different from what your competitors are doing, right? So, an analysis of your business environment, analysis of the competition, an analysis of your consumer, and then from all of that, and the culture, right? Culture is a very huge part of it, because that's the tool that we use to sell products or to sell ideas.
Yeah.
So there isn't one singular process, but I think there's a checklist for sure, right? The business, the consumer, the culture, and then from then on, you can be able to sort of now think about and use all of that information to distill, and make your informed decision.
This reminds me, when you're talking about the business, the consumer, the culture, it reminds me of when we are growing back in high school and primary school. They used to tell us, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail, which I think was our first interaction with strategy, all of us, because you knew whatever you are doing, you have to have a plan. Even when you are going to approach a chick, you have to have a plan. You just can't go, and be spontaneous. But I also remember when I was in school, we used to be told that sometimes, and I think it was a Steve Jobs quote who was talking about, when you talk about focus, you think that focus is all about saying yes to the thing that you've got to focus on. But focus is really about saying no to the 100 other things that you should not be able to focus on. And for you, having, being the lead strategist, I'm sure there are a lot of briefs that come in and maybe a lot of projects that you have to work on. But what is the process of elimination, even for a young creative who is watching, not just in terms of money, but also the value of the project that he or she is doing? What is the process of elimination so that he or she knows, when I'm planning to work on a brief, this is how I arrange it in terms of priority?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, because that's almost at the soul of what strategy is about. And, strategy, like I said, is about making informed decisions, right? Making informed decisions means you have to make choices, right? And when you make choices, you have to make sacrifices, right? You have to pick one thing over the other thing, right? It's one thing brands are still trying to learn, because I feel like, brands try to jump on everything, just for the sake of it. But when you make a choice, you have to make a sacrifice, and therefore strategy is all about making sacrifices. And you see, when you start to analyze how your business environment looks like, or how your market environment looks like, and how your consumer environment looks like, you start to realize that I'll give you an example. For instance, when Dove was, came around with their positioning around real beauty, it was almost coming from the fact that what the competition was doing, right, was all about, they were accentuating, beauty, and they were setting this very unrealistic, trends for beauty, that beauty has to be perfect. It has to be this slim girl, on an ad, with, looking all good, or looking all glammed up, right? And so the choice there was, you could be part of the Me Too and join them, right? Or you could actually make the decision to go the opposite direction, because like I said, marketing and advertising is all about orienting yourself in the space of in the space of the mind of the consumer, right? And so when you sacrifice what looks like it has worked in the previous, because your competition is doing that, and you go into this completely different direction. And from that alone, you start to realize, you made a choice, right? And you lost what has been working, and you picked up something new. In that case, it actually worked, because they were different. And I think, and so that's the point. You don't make decisions in isolation. You make decisions because someone else is also making decisions on the other end, right? If Coke, Coca-Cola, the soda, right? If Coke is talking about, happiness, right? Pepsi would be talking about something completely different. That's a choice they have to make, right? Because Coke is, is trying to, expand the cake, right? But you're trying to get a share of the cake. So your decisions are completely different. So I think, analyzing your context is almost what helps you make decisions and make choices.
Wow, I really think we should, we should boil your head and your brain and package it in juice and give it to everyone. I remember in high school we used to say, I could just get this book, ni chemshe, ni kunywe, ni supu, and then I nielewe kila kitu. But talking about sacrifice, you've said that strategy therefore is all about sacrifice, and I remember seeing this on your LinkedIn as well, where you're talking about how brands are now sacrificing humor, yet more and more consumers are actually looking out for humor. And I remember when you were having the same conversation with Alemu, he was all the proponent of humor in advertising, because people are actually interested in humor. People want to laugh, people want to forget their problems, yeah? And so I have two questions here. Number one is, how then do you decide how to inject humor in your brand such that you don't end up becoming a clown, because there are some brands that, it just becomes too funny. People get lost in the message. So you become a clown. And lastly, so in terms of sacrificing humor, because, there are also some serious topics that humor might not necessarily be able to bring it out. And, just that fine line between how you balance the humor and the message of your brand.
Yeah, I think the humor thing, even I was, I saw these two pieces of research which were very contradicting. One was saying how, after the pandemic, one of the top content formats or content types that people want to see is, funny stuff, right? And if you think about even the rise of all the comedians that we've seen, your Crazy Kenas, your, Elsa Majimbos, and all of that, it almost demonstrates the point that, we're making here, is the fact that people want to see more humor, right? And the truth is, I think a lot of this has come from the fact that, the world is not looking very good currently, right? There's a lot of gloom and doom as a result of the pandemic. There's a financial crisis. There's just a lot of problems, right? There's this huge uncertainty that we know that we're not going to make it out of this pandemic, and there's that existential crisis. So, humor presents a very nice, form of escape for everyone, right? If you want to see, you see something funny, you see a dog video, it's really hilarious. But the other piece of research that was contradicting to this is that the use of humor in the advertising industry is actually going down, right? And it's almost going at the expense of emotional stuff or emotional content, right? So I found it contradicting, and I was just trying to spark a conversation. Is that why, at a time when people are asking for more and more of humor in content, why would advertising people be going a different direction? I think the answer to that, I don't think I have the answer to that, but what I have is speculation. And I think just from my experience is these brands understand that consumers want a form of relief, right, from all this that's happening. But they're understanding that to mean that, I need to show you something inspiring. And if you think about, a lot of the pieces of work globally that came out last year, a lot of them were very emotional things, right? They were all, we're in this together, be strong. The future is, looking good. And I think maybe only the first piece of work that was emotional that worked, because everything after that was very aloof. And a lot of consumers were like, we're not in this together. Right? When you send me an email and tell me that, we're in this together, we're not, right? I'm currently losing my job.
Yes.
So we are not in this together, right? So I think there is a misunderstanding definitely between brands and consumers. I think, if imagining that people want relief doesn't mean that it has to come through emotion, right? It doesn't have to make me cry for me to feel good, right? I think when you make someone laugh, right, or when you make someone feel good about themselves, I think you're passing through an emotion, right? So it doesn't all have to come from an emotion. I think I read something so interesting the other day that meant that read, getting an emotional output doesn't mean you have to have an emotional input, right?
Yes.
So I think people definitely and marketers in general have to sort of understand their audience in the sense that you have to understand the time that they're in. I think we're at a time where everything looks so bad. So something that's funny right now is definitely going to be a goal, right? And I definitely understand what you're saying about there are some certain topics that you don't want to you don't want to make fun of, and of course depending on the product that you're selling. I mean, if you're selling funeral insurance, humor is not necessarily not something you want to use, but that's it doesn't mean the humor is not on it doesn't have to be on the death, it can be on something else, right? The whole ad can still end up being funny, right? It's exactly how and I know very little about comedy, but the joke doesn't have to be on the serious things, right? The joke is what sets up tension, right? And then you actually just pop it, and you get a very good emotional response out of it.
Yeah. Okay. You just reminded me about some funny funeral ad that I saw about killing you with comedy, and I was like, these guys are not in tune. They're not in tune with the culture.
Yeah.
Joel Murungi is saying the introduction of wokeness in the game is killing humor and creating uploadable ad campaign to play to the crowds are not very creative. Which reminds me, before you reply to his comment, is what do you think of the woke culture? Although I do understand that there's the part where, in as much as it's not being woke, it's about being responsible for what you say. How much of ourselves are we selling to the devil, to be able to remain relevant in the industry? Because right now, with everyone is ready with their phone on their keyboard. You just put a wrong comma somewhere and you're already cancelled, and the cancel culture is out here, especially in Kenya. It's terrible. What's your comment? How do you see the industry surviving through this pandemic and the woke culture itself?
The woke culture, I think that's a huge topic. I think it's I wrote something about brands taking advantage of the woke culture, right? And the pitfall that's that's sort of there is the fact that there's a culture of consciousness, and people are starting, of course, because of access to information through social media, you start to understand all the different evils that are happening in the world currently, right? And so as a human being, of course, you as an empathetic person, you start to connect to those stories and you start to feel something for them. And I think the woke culture is coming from that. It's coming from people achieving a higher level of consciousness about all the things that are happening around them. And of course, brands being brands, brands like to jump on any trend, and that's how they're jumping onto the woke culture, right? And they're starting to have opinions about beauty, and they're starting to have opinions about racism, and they're starting to have opinions about all these kinds of things. But it's a very dicey game for brands, because if you don't have the credibility to talk about something, right, then you should not be talking about it. And I think people are so much smarter now, right? People are very discerning now that they can actually they can tell that this is complete crap and this is legit. I think what I can comment on about the woke culture and how brands are taking it on is that if you don't have the credibility, do not talk about it. And I think I'll give you an example is, when Nike did the campaign with Colin Kaepernick, what is it called? I've forgotten it, but their latest one of their latest campaigns from last year, right? That was addressing I think it was in response to the to BLM and all that racism stuff that was happening in the US at the time. You see, Nike has had the credibility, and that's why that campaign was so well received, right? First of all, Nike has a credibility because they have been fighting racism for a while. They used Colin Kaepernick, who had already actually lost something. He'd actually been kicked out of the NFL for speaking out on racism, right? And so when all these elements come in together, really it came out like a very, very strong campaign, right?
Yeah.
Now look on the other side, and I think I'm trying to remember. I can't remember that name, but there was a brand that tried to talk about people of color and how they support them. And I think there's a model who came out. Was it L'Oreal? No, it wasn't L'Oreal. But I think there's a model who came out and said, you guys actually cancel my contracts because of this and this and this, right? And then suddenly they look like a laughing stock. You shouldn't be talking about this. You're just talking about this because it's the trend. And that's how brands look at consumers. They see that there's something is happening, and so we have to jump on it. Right?
Yes.
If you don't have the credibility on sustainability, if you're not doing anything about racism, if you're not doing anything about diversity, if you're not doing anything, about mental health, then do not talk about it, because that's the same consumers you're trying to reach are the ones who are going to actually bring you down.
But I always used to hate this term in the agency, because even George Lewis talks about it, these people who want to play the devil's advocate. But today I'm going to play the devil's advocate. When you're having a brief and you've done everything, you've done the proposition, you have the creative, and then someone stands up and say, let me play the devil's advocate, and then you go back to square one. But let me play the devil's advocate for today in terms of how you're talking about the brands jumping onto the woke culture. But there's also the concept of there's no such thing as bad publicity. I'm sure you've heard that quote thrown around everywhere. Bad publicity is good publicity, and the only bad publicity is when people are not talking about you. And the other day I also saw, what was his name, 50 Cent banning his Gucci shirts because they are not supporting Black people. And I like what you're saying, but I also try and understand why maybe the brands are doing this, because you realize if people are not talking about you, may end up getting forgotten actually, and which will do much more worse in terms of brand sales. And even if we forget brands and do it in the celebrity culture of our country, you see, these celebs, say for instance Bahati and his wife, who will do something on purpose with his wife, stage a breakup so that people can talk about it, and just to market their own videos. And I remember, I think you also saw H&M, the monkey thing, and by the time that thing was approved, I'm sure there was a high level of channel. By the time it went to the market, so many people will have already seen it in the company itself before it was released. So I don't know, but if you ask me, there's the fine line between, being talked about and being on the woke culture. And that's where I'd like you to comment on, because in as much as a brand will want to be safe, being safe does not really translate into ad sales and product placements and whatnot.
Yeah, true. I completely agree with what you're saying. I think, in fact, the brands trying to be safe is exactly why you end up being a boring brand, right? But I think on what you're saying about all publicity is supposed to be good publicity. I agree with that up to an extent, right? And there's a statement I want to read out by a guy called Mark Ritson, who is a fantastic marketing professor, right? And he says, not all publicity is good publicity, but as long as you don't undermine your proposition or entirely alienate your market, the salience gained from a bad news story often outweighs any damage to brand image, right? And I think the thought here is any publicity that, as long as it does not undermine your product or does not make your product look inferior or does not alienate any part of your market, will end up actually contributing to your brand, right? And so you're right. Most publicity is good publicity. The problem is with looking at it from that point of view is, a lot of how our brain works is all about, associations, right? If you think about, when you're thirsty, you will immediately think of a cold Coca-Cola, because that's the association Coke has been able to instill in your brain over a long time, right? And when you are associated with something negative, right, that's the mental association people have of you over time, right? So if you jump on all kinds of things just to get any kind of publicity, and you think that's going to sell a product, well, it is up to some point. But when people start to associate you with negative things, I think then it starts to actually work against your brand or your product. And like you said, I mean, if you mention the people you've mentioned who are very prone to to publicity, or that's their game, you will notice that people have negative associations about them the moment you just mention their name. And that's a risk that you're facing when you're jumping irresponsibly on any kind of stuff.
For a moment there, I was just thinking we should start charging for this conversation. The amount of information you're giving out is illegal. People should pay for this. People should pay for this information. As Ovita is saying, I wish all the money. We should, by the way. The next one, people are paying. I wish all the Kenyan brands were listening to this. Most brands are clout chasers. Community managers have crazy KPIs to achieve. That's why most brands will jump on any trend, on any trending matter without credibility. Which, if I may take you back in the agency scenario, is that what I used to see that whenever a client brings a brief, or they want to be on, or basically they want to raise awareness on social media, then they just wanted, are we trending? Are we trending? We want to trend. They don't care whether they're trending for good reasons or for bad reasons. They want to see themselves up there on the trend. So that was their KPI. As long as they're trending, that's good for them. And for young people out there who are watching, maybe you could talk a little bit about the trend, because I also realized there's so much about trending and building a community rather than just having a wide audience who are not really loyal to you. When you're coming up with strategy, is the aim to build a loyal community or a loyal following, or I don't know how it works from your end?
I think that's a very good question. I think with the explosion of digital and all these different platforms, I think it became, trending was almost the, what signifies success or what signifies fame, right? I mean, being the number one on the trend list on Twitter was almost what shown that that people are actually reading, they know about your product or have seen your ad. But I think over time we've started to realize that trending is not trending is not a goal, or should not be a goal. because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to meaningfully connect with your audience, right? And you're not constantly, and one of the things that people need to understand is that consumers are not constantly always trying to buy a product. You're not constantly in a consumer journey, or you're not constantly on your way to a supermarket, right? But what you're trying to do is, I think, with the rise of digital, it does not change the principles of advertising, right? The job of advertising is to create an association with the product in your head, and so by the time when you actually want to buy a product, you'll think of the brand that comes to you first, right? And trending does not solve that. Trending is a very short-term way of thinking about it, right? And it's also a very selfish way of thinking about it. When a client comes and tells that they want to trend, it's only for their own benefit. They're trying to only see themselves and be happy about their work that day, right? But the job of advertising is to create associations that link, that link the consumer to a product in a much positive way, and it creates value for them. And then that's where the idea of community comes about. When you're able to create a community, when you're able to consistently add value in the life of a consumer through your content, through the products that you're selling, through activities that you're doing, that's a much more meaningful way of building a brand than trying to trend every day.
When you're able to create value in a consumer consistently, so it's also not just about you're trending on January and then the next time we see you is in December during Christmas. So.
Exactly. It's also very expensive to try and trend that way. I think you'd have to pay a lot of money, you'd have to have a huge media budget to be able to do that. You'd have to pay a lot of influencers to be able to do that. You need to have incredibly, almost impossibly creative people to be able to create stuff that trends every day. So it shouldn't be a goal. I mean, when it happens, it's awesome, but it's not, it's not what builds a brand at the end of the day. And it's also very short term. I think the idea that it's a very short term way of thinking about it is almost what negates it completely.
Amazing. There was something that I remember. There's this writer I keep on following, and she talks about. She basically says that a writer is a prostitute of emotions. In the fact that the job of a writer is basically to evoke emotions, whether it's anger, humor, but to get an emotional reaction out of you. And when we were talking, you said something about you don't need to have an emotional input. You don't need to get an emotional output. You don't need to have an emotional input. And for a digital strategist, or for a strategist, let me not negate you to one sphere only. For a strategist, what are you a prostitute of? Because I know you're a prostitute of something.
What am I a prostitute of? I like this segment. I think curiosity. I think, and I don't know if that makes sense, prostitute over curiosity, but I like to learn about random things. I think it's the one thing that's almost been constant all through my life. I've always just wanted to know about something a bit more deeper than most people would be trying to know about it. I think that would definitely be the one thing and it's almost the heart of being a strategist. And I think to your earlier question, earlier in this stream, I think you asked, are you born a strategist or are you made a strategist? I don't think you're born a strategist, but for you to become a good strategist, you have to have almost an inherent, inherent curiosity. You have to want to know things, and that's how you get to learn about consumers. That's how you get to learn about different markets, different industries, different categories. I think that for sure is, my level of prostitution.
Well. If the problem with having live interviews is that if someone came and just walked into the room and had that is my level of prostitution. They'll be like, okay, prostitution anonymous. So please don't take it out of context. Listen to the whole interview,
please.
guys.
My God.
they'll be like, Scanad strategists in a prostitution. Then I'm like, what? You know, these people write their news out here.
Don't forget the curiosity. I think that will definitely bring it back down.
Yeah. We're about to get into the emotional part of the interview now, where now we leave Kidogo, the strategy in you, and then we go to Tizomu, the man. And, you know, in life, people have a lot of things. Oh, I can't believe it's been 54 minutes. You're so easy to talk to.
Even I am surprised that, you know, this has gone on so fast.
Yeah, man. Anyway, so in life, people fear a lot of things, and, you know, just for you, I'd like to know, what is your biggest fear right now? It's been a year of, you know, having to reflect within every time we were looking outside, but what the pandemic has taught me is that most of the time we should spend it looking within, you know. And I want to know, in the past year, what has been your greatest fear, and what is your biggest fear right now?
I think, well, other than the pandemic and the actual virus, I think my fear of, you know, after introspection, you're right, you know, when you're alone, which is what this pandemic has almost forced us to become, you get to introspect a bit more often. I think my fear, what I realize my fear is uncertainty, is not knowing what's coming next. It's not being in control, which, you know, you'd say it would come naturally, you know, with a strategist. You know, when you're not in, you know, strategy is about control. It's about, you know, setting boundaries and making choices about, you know, things. And so when I'm not in control, I think I'm very fearful.
Which is extremely not being in control, but you know, so my therapist tells me, you know, that probably the essence of life is letting go of control. Do you think that's a good thing to say, especially to a strategist?
That's why my life is best.
Yeah, your life
that's why it's but no, for sure. I think you see, the thing about fear is, you know, you're, as a human, you know, you're not supposed to fear, right? Yes. I think you should have fears because, you know, you have emotions and you have irrational things or irrational thoughts about stuff.
Yeah.
And I think having fear is good. I think you know, being able to take them on despite the fear, or being brave despite the fear, is the idea. So I might fear not being in control, but I think I'm brave about it. And I will try to let my life flow for sure.
Well, if it helps you, if it adds something to it, being vulnerable on this show, you know, that's a sign of letting go of control. So good job.
Exactly. I wouldn't be answering this type of question anywhere else.
Now that we have you, so would you rather do, speaking of, you know, just fear and control, so if it came down to it, would you rather do the right thing or the good thing?
Again, that's a very impossible question to answer because it depends with the circumstance.
Yes.
It definitely depends with the circumstance. I'm just seeing Ryan, Mr. Ryan Majiwa. I see you. I see you. I'm sorry about that. I think it depends with the situation, because based on the circumstances, you will find yourself, you know, making the right decision, or sometimes, you know, doing the thing. So it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the circumstance. Now, before I let you go, most of the time I have a few more questions left. But Mr. Ryan Majiwa, shout out to you, shout out to Avita, shout out to Joel.
Thanks for catching this, man.
Yeah. Before I let you go, you know, part of your job as a digital strategist involves asking a lot of questions. You know, you ask people a lot of questions, trying to get down to the gist of the brief, to where the meat is, because people, you know, write a lot of things to sound clever, but technically what they want is one simple thing. And for you, I'd like to know, you know, after asking all these questions, I'm going to challenge you to ask me one question right now.
Okay, cool. What's the one question I have for you?
Yeah.
What do you fear? I think I've been vulnerable on this show. I think you should be vulnerable on your own show.
Okay, let's drink some water for that. Vulnerability, I hate it. But I'll start. The first thing that I fear, and I always tell people, and they laugh at me, are cockroaches. I fear those animals. I ensure my house. I'd rather have a rat inside my house than a cockroach. I hate. Me, if I see a cockroach in your house, if you are dating, it's over. If you are my friend, we end
That's
it
a
there.
deal breaker for sure.
Yeah, cockroach is a deal breaker for some people. Say they are cheating, all these big things which are valid, but for me it's a cockroach. Cockroaches can break homes. Trust me, guys.
Respect cockroaches, I guess. Have you ever seen the cockroaches from Mombasa? They're huge, and they actually fly. So I think you'd be completely terrified.
Oh, yeah, what are those ones? Those ones. I heard about those ones. I was like, this is why I don't go to holiday in Mombasa. I'll see a flying cockroach. I'm like, what is this? This is so that is one. But in terms of now, the emotional fear is fear of not, giving it my all and not living up to. I hate this word potential because dating coaches tell you don't date potential, date character. But my greatest fear is dying before I've lived my purpose, or dying before I've given it my all. So in everything that I do, I try and give it my all. That's my biggest fear.
Okay, I think that's a very legit fear for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Now I'm feeling all teary-eyed. Thanks
for opening up to me, man. Appreciate it.
Joy is saying also, I think while navigating this digital space, one also has to be a prostitute of trends. Curiosity is a good one too. Do you agree with Joy Tizomu about being a prostitute of trends?
I think yes and no. Yes, because trends are things that are relevant currently. So it's it's good to take advantage of what's happening currently. I think the problem with trends is jumping around a lot, right? And therefore not having you're distracted a lot. Because one day you're talking about wokeness, if that's the current trend, and then the other day you're talking about something else, then you're talking about something else. I think trends are great, but trends are very short-lived and they're very short-term. So you have to balance. I think Ryan was trying to ask about. Sorry to take over your interview. Does one truly selfless act exist?
Yeah,
I think that's a good question because. And I definitely see the point, because can you be truly selfless? Because you're almost all the time you're almost serving yourself in different ways.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one we should think about for sure.
Yeah. True. If you ask me, the only truly selfless act, it was when Jesus died on the cross, and it ended there. After that, people just became selfish. Joy is also saying, big up on you, Omwami Ashaya, for normalizing therapy. Wait. That's something that needs to be projected in the creative world. Maybe Tizomu, you should speak about it, because I'm sure, having worked in multiple agencies, I'm sure you've seen a lot of creatives, not be able to handle the pressure. And for me, why I decided to, people say that people have become weak in this age, but past our father Jal and hand to, I'm back. Yeah, in the past, people used to meet a lot, but right now in the modern age, we're all spending so much time alone, so you get lost in your thoughts, and things start happening in your head. I don't know if you've ever ended up committing suicide while young in the industry, and that really impacted me. So I don't know if you've had a close encounter yourself with that?
Well, yeah, for sure. I think mental health is or has been a crisis in advertising. I guess before no one used to know about it and it used to happen in secret. But I think now, and you're right, people working from home and just the enormous pressure that creatives sort of deal with every day. I think it's a huge problem. I think there's a responsibility from both sides. I think, from my opinion, first of all, I think people deal with mental health issues in very different ways, and then two, I definitely want to acknowledge the fact that everyone sort of there are people who are predisposed to mental health issues, and for some people it sort of develops depending on the environment that you're in. I think there's responsibilities on you as a person. I think you have to be mindful of your own mental health, and you have to take care of it, and you have to guard it, right? And if that involves putting up boundaries, if that involves asking for time, I think you have to champion it yourself from the start. But I also think organizations have a very huge important role, because people, companies need to stop sort of working or operating ignoring the fact that they're putting pressure on these people, and they don't understand how these people are living and what they're going through. So I think organizations need to definitely set up interventions, set up solutions, and it's not just about having a talk, right? Most places will try and just here we have a talk about mental health and what you should do with it. I think it actually comes with actions. If that involves having a free day, that involves listening to people often, that involves having a therapist in-house. I think there definitely has to be actions from organizations sort of try and mitigate against this problem, because it's sad when we lose creatives because of that, and it's something that could have actually been solved by the organization. So that's my thoughts on that.
Okay, we sadly have to come to the end of the show, but I can't let it go without asking, what do you think of Kenyan in the same breath of prostitution? What do you think of let me retract my word. In the same breath of trends, what do you think of Kenyan brands embracing
Pride Month?
Given it is June. Karibu nichome hapo.
I think you, as a brand, and I like the question because it comes for what do you think of Kenyan brands embracing Pride Month? I think as a brand, if your audience is would take that, or is liberal enough to take that conversation, then you should celebrate, or you should embrace Pride Month. If your brand is going to, if your consumers as a brand are going to be alienated by that message, then you shouldn't. That's my answer.
Yeah, that's a very PC answer, which is guys talking about isn't jumping around the essence of prostitution. Wow. Ryan is also saying that isn't a self-defense act from Ryan. That is I did not see it that way. You're making me question my spirituality.
Let me tell you, if we keep listening to Ryan, this interview will not end.
Not to Ryan anymore. James Kamau is saying, my greatest fear is that I will never be able to create a harmonious life for myself, which I will thoroughly enjoy, and that I will lose freedom to choose at some point in life. Okay. And lastly, before I let you go, Tizomu,
cool.
It's in the same spirit. Ryan, this is also for you, Ryan, so you can also give us your answer, but primarily for Tizomu. And say, Jesus Christ has told you, Moses, it's time. I need you home, my friend, my son, and everything that you've land on earth, every conversation that you've had, every strategy plan that you've released into the world, all of that disappears. But before he takes you home, he tells you, I'm giving you a minute or 2 minutes to tell people the 3 things that you hold true, the 3 truths that you as Tizomo know to be the gospel truth according to you. So what will be those 3 things that you take as the 3 truths of your life?
Well, 3 truths of my life, if this is the last day, would be, and I don't know how to even answer this. I think I'd answer this in virtues. I think, one, you need to understand that you don't belong on this earth. You're, and I don't know, but I'm not getting gospel here, but I don't think you belong on this earth, but you should definitely leave a positive impact. I think the second one is, I think, be kind to people. You need to understand that, everyone has a background. The same way there's always this thing, this saying that, we blame other people for something, or we see what other people have done by the actions, and we judge ourselves by intention. I think you need to understand that everyone has an intention for every action. So be kind to people. And third, I think, have fun. For sure. You never get to do this again. So have fun.
Have fun. I think I like number 3. But
it's my favorite as well.
Yeah, man. If you're not having fun, you're doing life wrong. I think that is a manual that is input in you, that if you're not having fun, there's something that is totally broken. Last question is from Joy, who is asking about was I did
sorry,
I get lost?
Repeat that again?
Yeah,
Kidogo.
Oh, Joy is asking, what are the memorable brands or campaigns that you've individually worked on for you?
Am I going first?
Yeah, you go first.
I think my most memorable one was definitely one of the most recent ones. I think it has to be the M-Pesa campaign for digital channels. I think it was something, life made easy on M-Pesa. That's definitely one of my most favorite things that I've been a part of. Sure.
Life made easy.
Yeah, life made easy on M-Pesa.
It's the next one, the future. So it has to be
Sorry?
my next one. My most memorable campaign has to be my next one. That's
he hasn't worked on a good campaign yet.
Wow. That's me for you to say. But before
I'm joking. Sorry?
This is the last Moses. This is my last question. How do you, as Moses, Tizomo?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
Oh, the question is, how do you define greatness? What is greatness to you?
Greatness to me is, I think, being able to achieve something by pulling others. For sure.
Being able to achieve something by pulling others.
I think it's and the
guys,
difference
I don't
between.
think if I add anything to.
No, sorry. Go on.
Go on. It's your day. It's your day.
No, I was gonna say,
Yeah, sure.
I think that the difference between greatness and something awesome is, if you think about football, for instance, the difference between, no, I think football is the wrong example. I think what I was trying to say is greatness comes from, being able to do something that's so huge that it actually plays a role in everyone's life, right? That it's almost able to, make a positive day for someone, or, make someone learn something, or, it's, if it doesn't play a role in someone else's life in a very meaningful way, then it's not greatness.
Wow. If I add anything to this, I'm going to be, even James Kamau agrees with me. Wow, that was a beautiful conversation. At least from my end, I had fun. I normally don't have a script. I just want to learn. One thing I don't tell people is that I'm very selfish. I do these things for me. It's you guys are secondary. So I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn from the best creative minds, and just to learn from. Really happy that he came through. Before I get emotional, I'm going to give it to him so that he closes for us, not with a word of prayer, but with something, encourage the young men out here.
Oh my God, I don't know. First of all, I think this is a great platform. I told you that earlier. I think this is exactly what greatness is, right? It's doing something awesome and also being able to pull others. So I think this is great. Being able to curate stories of creatives, and have these kinds of conversations, I think is something that's super impressive. I really had fun. I think this was pretty fun. For me, I love talking about advertising. I love talking about strategy. So thanks for having me, man. And thanks for everyone who, sort of joined in. That was pretty fun.
Yes.
It's my third
Thank you
rule.
guys for tuning in.
Live.
That's your third rule. Oh, yeah. Have fun. Have fun, guys. Big Kato, James Kamau, Ryan, Ovita, Joy. If I haven't mentioned you, remember greatness. I'm being kind, and God loves you. Take care. Don't do drugs. Okay, you can do some drugs. Take care. Have fun and enjoy your weekend. See you next Friday. Hopefully.
Cheers. Cheers.